LA Noire is an orphan. It's unlike any other game of its generation. A pastiche of tropes from visual novels, adventure games, and open-world action titles, squished together to resemble the film and fiction genre that shares its name. It's a game whose tech and ethos was well ahead of its time, using facial scanning to make its narrative feel real in a way that goes beyond a gimmick. It's a title that, under normal circumstances, would garner at least a sequel, if not an entire franchise. But instead, it remains an odd outlier in Rockstar's catalog, from a time when they released games almost yearly, and its developer Team Bondi has been closed for almost 10 years. At one point, not long after its release, a sequel from the team who had made LA Noire was in development, and after 4 years of work, it disappeared without a trace. This is its story. LA Noire took 7 years to develop. Despite whatever acclaim it would receive, any form of sequel would be a tough pitch to a publisher. What started out as an early exclusive for the PlayStation 3, developed and funded by Sony, was offloaded to Rockstar's publishing arm, due in large part to the ballooning $50 million price tag. Rockstar would have to do much more than just publish LA Noire, however, as they would be forced to put a stop to Team Bondi's over-the-top ideas and supplement their 80-ish employees with their own workforce. This was due in large part to studio head Brendan McNamara, who would not only spend $10 million developing a proprietary facial scan technology, but also would contribute to the, as the International Game Developers Association noted, absolutely unacceptable working conditions. Turnover was high at Team Bondi, many of whom were young developers in Australia or former Team Soho developers who had relocated from London after working alongside McNamara on The Getaway.
It's worth pointing out that Rockstar used to be very keen on making Team Bondi something like Rockstar Sydney. The more they worked with Team Bondi management, the more they came to understand that this was a terrible idea.
Shortly after the release of LA Noire in 2011, it became clear just how rough times had gotten under McNamara. Just over a month after release, Andrew McMillan would publish Why Did LA Noire Take 7 Years to Develop at IGN, a complete look at 10 and 12-hour days and 7-day work weeks, which was overseen by a fractured corporate structure that resulted in McNamara bullying even the lowest employee on the ladder to get his way. During the time Bondi was in Australia, over 100 employees would pass through their doors, resulting in so many omitted names in the game's credits that staff was forced to create their own website cataloging a complete list of who had actually worked on the title. In a time where stories like this are unfortunately commonplace, Team Bondi was a particularly bad case. Understandably, relations between the two companies had broken down, and most importantly, Rockstar maintained control over the LA Noire IP. While Team Bondi did start work on a new game in the same style shortly after release, it couldn't be named something like LA Noire 2. To put it in perspective, in 7 years, Team Bondi and McNamara had gone from an independent gaming company with a long-term contract with Sony to a company with no publisher, no IP to show for their work, and enough controversies and development issues to make any investor think twice about getting involved. What Team Bondi needed was a buyer. Enter George Miller. While his production company in Australia was finishing up work on Happy Feet 2 and transitioning to live-action production for Fury Road, the developers of the Happy Feet tie-in game Crumb Studios began to see financial woes due in part to the inflation of the Australian dollar. As a result, Miller founded Kennedy Miller Mitchell Interactive, a video game arm of the studio that absorbed the team from Chrome. Admiring how Team Bondi had blended games and film, and seeing their troubles post-release as a product of that same inflation, KMM Interactive moved to acquire the remaining Team Bondi employees and purchase the rights to the new detective game that McNamara was developing. As a result, Team Bondi itself would be entered into administration, while its other assets were auctioned off to pay off the $1.3 million of salaries and bonuses that went unpaid. The new team at KMM Interactive would be put on developing the tie-in to Mad Max Fury Road, taking over from the Swedish developer Avalanche Studios alongside their new spiritual successor to LA Noire. And its name was, unfortunately, The Whore of the Orient. For reference, the phrase Whore of the Orient is a culturally insensitive descriptor for the city of Shanghai from the time the game takes place in 1936. Name aside, Shanghai isn't exactly where a spiritual successor to LA Noire would be expected to take place, but I definitely see where their heads were at. LA in the 1940s was in the midst of a sort of revival, being pushed forward by the blossoming highway system, the golden age of Hollywood, and some version of modern American suburban life, all developing at the same time and attempting to cover up the sort of old world philosophy of the pre-war. LA was moving upwards. Shanghai was very much on the other end, however. A cultural melting pot of Jewish people escaping from Greater Germany, an end to British oversight that had existed since the Opium Wars, and being almost exactly 1 year out from the Battle of Shanghai with Toho's Japan, an invasion that would lead to one of the most brutal massacres in history in Nanking. According to people like McNamara, this is one of the great untold stories of the 20th century. The game's intention was to maintain the facial scan technology and be a AAA title, one that was of a similar scale to what the team had developed as Team Bondi with Rockstar. Warner Bros. Interactive, who was working alongside KMM Interactive for their Mad Max title, was also slated to publish and provide support. However, this deal didn't last long. To preface, the source on this isn't airtight, but feels candid enough to provide a look at what happened. In 2013, leaker and investigator Super Regatory uncovered a blog post from a spouse of someone who worked at KMM Interactive that notes their spouse had been made redundant as a developer due to Warner Bros. Pulling out of the deal in December 2012. As a result, any new publisher was expected as late as April of the next year. Unfortunately for this couple who had relocated from the Netherlands to Sydney, their work visas wouldn't last long enough to accommodate the termination in such a small gaming industry. It's unclear how many other employees were laid off. However, this is likely where the Mad Max game was returned to Avalanche, who would announce the title at E3 about 6 months later and would release it in 2015. The team that had worked on LA Noire was now in a similar place to where they were at 8 years prior. They had an announced game, one that was ambitious, but without funding and in between publishers. What felt like a fluke due to the technology development for LA Noire was beginning to look instead like a trend for those under McNamara, whose 3 developed games struggled to get to the finish line, let alone in a timely manner. Due to the lack of publisher support and funding, the project was temporarily shelved while they, quote, pursued the right investor to partner with. However, in April, the project would be revived and receive $200,000 in funding from Screen New South Wales' Interactive Media Fund. While not focused exclusively on games, the fund's primary goal is to build the digital development sector in New South Wales. 2013 was only the second year the Interactive Media Fund was a part of Screen NSW, having been previously independent and providing support to games like Fruit Ninja. When looking into the fund, it became clear that Horror of the Orient was the largest scale title that had received the investment, as the vast majority of them were mobile titles and very few received an amount close to $200,000, which is still a drop in the bucket for AAA game development and LA Noire's $50 million budget. At around this same time, lead designer Alex Carlisle would leave the team at KMM Interactive and start his own studio, Intuitive Games, in Sydney. While the studio appears to be inactive since 2019, they had been in development for 2 detective games, one named The Canonical Five, a reference to the killings of Jack the Ripper, and Malice. While neither game appeared to match the scope or size of what the team at KMM Interactive was developing, Intuitive Game Studios also received funding from Screen NSW. While it wasn't $200,000, it's still worth noting that none of what Carlisle worked on at Intuitive or KMM Interactive that received that funding released. Despite the extra help, the project at KMM Interactive appears to once again go quiet after this. It's speculated by some sources that the remaining members of the Team Bondi staff were laid off, Carlisle and McNamara included, due in part to Warner Bros. Pulling out and the lack of substantial funding. As far as I can tell, very few if any of the employees remained on the gaming side of KMM Studios, and the project went largely dormant. However, in August of 2013, an unnamed source would leak unfinished footage to Videogamer.com, who would repost it with an added watermark not only at the top right of the screen, but also taking up the bottom third. This is the only public footage of Horror of the Orient that exists, and shows a game extraordinarily similar to LA Noire. Despite its crude state and frame rate issues, it does tell us a lot about what it was going to be. For one, a common criticism of the first game was how large and empty it felt. Seeing these more densely populated pieces of Shanghai seems to imply to me that this is a smaller Yakuza-style open world, lessening the development workload and more efficiently using resources. We also see things like a counter button for melee, and an awareness of what went wrong with the first game. This is mostly speculation on my part, but I don't necessarily think this is what the entire game looked like in 2013 when this was released. If it was, KMM Interactive would have had no trouble finishing the project in that state and finding a publisher. What this instead looks like is a sort of proof of concept or vertical slice to what Horror of the Orient was going to be to show new potential publishers and investors. That would explain the reused animations, stock sound effects, and again the stability issues.
I think it was clear from the content that it was not intended for public consumption, so it was a shame that someone felt the need to break our non-disclosure agreement and release an incomplete representation of the game. Choosing to ignore confidentiality agreements in this manner only harms development teams, projects, and the industry.
Despite this, however, it would be the last major news regarding what KMM Interactive were working on. By the end of the year, their website would be taken down, leaving no word on the status of the project or the studio. In 2016, in an interview with the Game Hugs podcast, Derek Proud, a producer at KMM Interactive, who had helped bring the former Team Bondi employees into the company, notes that Doug Minchell's mentality was that they could afford to buy up the remains of Team Bondi, and if it didn't work out, they didn't, quote, have to worry about it. He also mentions that he, as in Proud, McNamara, Carlisle, and a handful of others, had fought for the project up to the studio's bitter end, which was around his departure in late 2012. He finishes off by saying that it was officially cancelled, and that it's unlikely that it would ever see the light of day. Brendan McNamara would move on to found Video Games Deluxe with a handful of former KMM Interactive and Team Bondi higher-ups. In 2017, they would release a VR version of LA Noire, and are currently working on the VR versions of San Andreas for Oculus, which was announced in 2021. Because Rockstar maintained the rights to the LA Noire name, however, over the years rumors and hints have come up implying that something was in the works from them. In 2012, shortly after the release of the first game, Rockstar released a statement that said that, while nothing had officially been decided, there was still a possibility of a true LA Noire sequel, but like with Red Dead, the company was prone to long gaps between titles. While any actual information of Rockstar actively working on a new LA Noire title has been scarce, in mid-2020, YouTube created an LA Noire Part 2 topic, something that is auto-generated with 1980s songs, such as Matthew Wilder's Break My Stride, with a copyright by Rockstar and a mention of KTI, the fictional radio station from the original LA Noire. While this could be a coincidence, this has led some to speculate that LA Noire Part 2 may be the title that Rockstar has been working on since the release of Red Dead 2. However, this feels unlikely. A version of LA Noire 2 may never release, and the small glimpses of what KMM Interactive were working on may be all we ever see of the project. But that leaves LA Noire as a unique piece of gaming. The team that moved from Team Bondi were painfully mismanaged, and the continued support that McNamara and others received paints a picture of an industry that allows powerful men to continuously fail upwards, receiving government funding and having people beneath them laid off until they are once again working alongside giants like Rockstar. While the franchise's most notable contribution to gaming is furthering the technology to blend the line between film and games, it still has to contend with the abuse and, frankly, incompetence of a handful of its higher-ups in the systems they create that prevents new titles from being efficiently developed. Perhaps it's best then that any sequel remained on the cutting room floor.